In these perilous times, see from current events how biblical prophecy is coming to pass in front of our eyes. You're watching In the Last Days, the program that looks at Israel and the end times with teaching from a Hebraic perspective. With Martin and Natalie Blackham, thank you to our friends and partners who make this program possible. Now, here's Martin and Natalie.
Hi, welcome to the In the Last Days television program for myself, Martin Blackham. Natalie's behind the scenes today. This is the program that looks at Israel and behind the scenes, behind the news. So great to have you with us, wherever you're watching today across Europe and into the United States. We've had viewers watching, so wherever you're watching or by way of internet, thank you so much for joining us today. And we're very excited to welcome Elie, and you'll have to help me with your name.
Pieprz.
Pieprz. Great to have you with us, Elie. And
pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for coming across. You've come across from Gush Etzion, which is in South Jerusalem, correct, I understand, and you've come across today to join us. And you are the National Director of iVote Israel. Correct. You've been involved with that since, I believe that was that 2009?
Well, actually, we just launched it last year. But it had been a project had been in process since before I made Aliyah back in 2009, 2010. And
I'm going to talk about your journey to the land of Israel, because you're originally from the United States, from Mercer Island in Seattle, which is very close to Seattle.
Absolutely, yeah.
And for our viewers, some of you may remember the TV show Dr. Fraser Crane that was set in Seattle, which is the West Coast. Correct. But it's in the north of the West Coast.
Yes, it was. For those of you who remember the last Winter Olympics, very close to Whistler and very close to Vancouver, on the northwestern coast of the United States. Seattle was our home was my home since '99. I've been there for 12 years, and it was a lovely place. A lot of international companies are based there, like Microsoft and Starbucks and Boeing. And it's a very cohesive, lovely Jewish community and general community. But at a certain point, my wife and I, my wife had done her graduate work at the University of Washington, which initially brought us out there. And there's a rabbi who we were very close with, Rabbi Daniel Lapin, who was based in Mercer Island, Washington. And when we got married, we decided it would be a great idea to spend a year, 2 years with our rabbi, learning a little bit more, getting closer to our faith in a non-traditional way. Many people, it's very common in the Jewish world to, after a couple gets married, maybe spend a year in Israel, binding with their faith, with their people, and that's creating a good foundation for the rest of their married life. We decided to do that in Seattle, and then we decided to stay for a dozen years and have our 3 daughters and help to build what I believe is a robust Jewish community, and not just Seattle, but specifically the island, Mercer Island, which is a beautiful, beautiful island. And I encourage all of your viewers, when you have the chance to go to the States, you definitely want to check out the Seattle area, but also specifically Mercer Island.
And then you made the decision to come to Israel, yeah, which is a huge change, and it's something we've talked about a lot on In the Last Days television program, about people making Aliyah, having to uproot, some leaving family behind, coming to live in Israel. I think it was Dov Lippman who was saying that very often they have to take a lower salary because there isn't so much types of work where they can get the same sort of salary as they would in the United States. So big decision for you to come across.
It is a big decision, and you know, now that I've moved here in Israel, the American and frankly the English-speaking Jewish community that was here in Israel is very bonded, very connected. Obviously, we have a lot in common. One of the common denominators that you find pretty much across the board is that people fall into one of 2 categories. One, both a husband and wife decided at the time when they were going to get married that they wanted to establish a life for themselves in Israel. Maybe they had family who came and that was very attractive to them. Maybe they came here for study on vacation and they fell in love with the place, or they felt in order to be really Jewish, you need to do it in Israel. And there are many people along those lines. And then there are others, like myself and my wife, who came to much later in life. That wasn't part of our thought process when we got married, and certainly we never really spoke about it. I had worked in politics as a lobbyist for some time, then worked in marketing, eventually as a real estate developer. And at a certain point, after seeing the way that the real estate market was just going downhill in the United States, the recognition to me came, and to my wife, was that it wasn't merely a economic cyclical event, but there was some spiritual dynamic here as well. And therefore, the response for my family was not just to, be cautious when it comes to, the line of work I'm in, do some other, either maybe switch out of real estate or do something else. There had to be some sort of spiritual component as well. Frankly, having been in the Mercer Island community for a dozen years, we're very involved with seeing the community grow and flourish. My wife founded a Jewish day school, which now has over 120 kids, entering its 6th or 7th year right now. There was a lot that we did. We made our mark, but we also thought that it was time for us to move to the next chapter of our spiritual development. And both my wife and I, when we approached each other about the idea of moving to Israel, we were very timid. I have this idea, I've never spoken about it before, it's still kind of out there, and we both came to each other with the exact same idea at the exact same time. And obviously, that says something. But the process itself of going from the germination of the idea to actually the execution and actually getting on that El Al flight when you make Aliyah, that took us slightly over a year. The fact that in all the ebbs and flows of all the positives and the negatives and the drawbacks and the challenges that occur, some that you anticipate, some that you don't anticipate, my wife and I seem to be even keel pretty much the whole way. And again, that says something else about that this was the right decision for us and our family. Now with 3 years of Aliyah in the rearview mirror, I'll say that, we're very pleased, grateful to be here. And again, one other thing that we've noticed is that we really are amongst the first generation of Jews who are coming to Israel out of choice. And as you commented earlier about one of your previous guests, member of Knesset, Dov Lippman, that we are the first people who generally are giving up a higher level of living, certain comforts that we had in America or in any country that you came from, we just don't have here in the States. Some of it is just we don't have the language, we don't have, the culture is different. But there are many other eases and positive aspects of our previous life that we're not abandoning it in a negative way. We don't like that. That's not what we're saying. We're saying America, England, Europe was wonderful, treated us very well. We have a tremendous amount of respect and appreciation for where we came from. Frankly, countries that protected our ancestors or our immediate family when many other countries were not. At the same time, there's a recognition that in order to be Jewish in its ultimate fashion, in its ideal fashion, Israel is a place to do it. And my grandparents were all survivors of the Holocaust. They didn't have the opportunity, they didn't have the ability, frankly, they didn't even have the dream in many cases even to come to Israel. Although, with one exception, I had a grandmother who is still alive, and that always was her dream. But generally, that was not the case. And certainly, generations before that, was not the case that people ever thought of coming to Israel. And if they did, it was because life was so hard where they were that why not? Let's give our best and let's go to Israel and see what happens.
So it's amazing to see the move, because some of our viewers, maybe a lot of you, will be very in favor of Aliyah, but the practical stage, like in the States, you can't U-haul to Israel. It literally means you have to sell up, that you have to move furnitures here, that there's a cutting off. So it's a huge move. But when you get here and you go to the Western Wall, you go to Jerusalem and you see the things, it's just amazing to see. And for us, we've covered the Nefesh Ben Nefesh flights and seeing the people arriving, the tears and the joy, and it's quite astounding, really.
When we shared the news with our daughters that we were going to uproot their lives and come here. They had never been to Israel. Certainly Israel was part of our theology, but it wasn't something that we spoke about in a very tangible, practical way. And all of a sudden, they were relatively young. The oldest was 10, and it was a big shock actually when we told them. The oldest was 9, and the first thing we showed them, amongst the first things, was the ceremonies that Nefesh B'Nefesh would have as families come to Israel. And my daughters would watch it for hours. Watch the planes. We got up one time at like 4 in the morning to watch a plane arrive in Israel and see it streamed live. And we're cheering even though the first 45 minutes, nothing's happening. You're looking pretty much at a blank screen waiting for a plane to arrive. But many times they'd watch over and over. They had this one series of 3 planes, one coming from Canada, one from the United States, one from England. They're all landing at the same time. And you're meeting some of the families as they're in their airport in their home country, as they're leaving, and the excitement. You get chills. And when one of my daughters came, the first thing she did without planning was she immediately jumped on the ground and kissed the ground. And she'd never been here before. She's kissing asphalt. And she's a young child, but there was a certain recognition that we're coming home. And as foreign as many aspects of Hebrew and Israeli culture are, and there are many aspects which are foreign to the Western world. There's other aspects which is unbelievably warm and welcoming. And as I was mentioning, one of the common denominators between almost all Anglos, as we call ourselves here, English-speaking people who have made Aliyah, is that many of us, or if not all of us, have left our significant family, immediate family, back home in the States and Europe. And when you come here, you don't have that, and you're missing that, and particularly when you're going through such a traumatic experience of trying to reestablish and trying to make friends and trying to figure out where the grocery store is and how to read your electricity bill, the other English speakers become that family. And it's an unbelievably bonding method for the children of Israel who are now coming back and becoming really a nation. We were Jews in different cities in America and Europe, but when you come to Israel, those individual Jews become a nation. And it's very similar to in biblical times when you had 12 different tribes, and the rabbis tell us that when the Jews left Egypt, they went through the Red Sea. They went through 12 different tunnels, essentially, to go through the Red Sea. But when the Jews came in to cross the Jordan, were actually going into Israel, they weren't separated at that point by the tribes. They went in all by themselves. And I think that is demonstrative of what's happening now in our times, where when you are living in different countries, in different cities, you're all Jewish, and we celebrate Passover at the same time and the Sabbath at the same time, and we deal with our relations with our non-Jewish friends in a similar way. But we're all different, and we all have different customs and different. When you come to Israel, even the different customs adds to the tapestry of the Jewish nation. I mean, it doesn't divide us, doesn't create barriers. In fact, it enhances the cohesiveness of the nation.
Now, when you came from Seattle and you moved here, you changed role, and I'm maybe skipping a bit to your Tuesday Night Live. I think a lot of the viewers would be quite interested. Actually, both Natalie and myself were watching, I think we've even watched a few of them, the Saturday Night Live. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Rut Sheva were showing these programs. So tell us a bit about as I say, I'm skipping a little bit, but Tuesday Night Live in Jerusalem and how you got involved in that.
Well, it's a great story. The Tuesday Night Live in Jerusalem is a television show. It was on for a number of years. I've actually just stopped filming this past year. But it was actually the #1 live television show coming from Jerusalem. It was broadcast on Arutz Sheva initially, but also on an American television network called JLTV, Jewish Live Television. And they're in, I believe it's about 40 million homes right now throughout the United States. They just broadcast the Maccabiah games and trying to get additional programming here. But basically, this was the idea, as you mentioned, Saturday Night Live. They added a little bit of humor. It also it was a talk show where you would have interviews. You would have opening monologues. They would try to add in some skits, try to make it funny and enjoyable and entertaining, but also add a certain spiritual component to try to bring the light of Jerusalem and the spirituality that comes from Israel out to the rest of the world. And even though the show was on a network called JLTV, a Jewish television station in the States, a significant, if not a majority, of the viewers of the program were all Christian.
And it was unique in that it was English speaking, and I don't think there was anything else quite similar to that. English, in fact, maybe even not now, that there's something like that that's English speaking from Jerusalem.
There is a void, and I think it would be great to have additional English programming coming from Jerusalem and providing that perspective. And I think it's beneficial both to the Jewish community as well as the non-Jewish community throughout the world to see what comes from Israel. Obviously, there is a tremendous amount of discussion in the world media and in the blogs about what's happening from Israel. And, you know, there's always politics, and in politics there's both sides, and nowadays the volume just keeps getting raised and raised and raised. And to be able to have a message of just basic general spirituality, of positiveness, of faith emanating from Jerusalem, which is Jerusalem's natural environment, if that were to start happening on a more frequent basis, I think it's better for everyone.
And there's a great interest. I know that a lot of our viewers, many of you may even have watched Saturday, the Tuesday Night Live, yeah. And many of them are regular viewers and regular listeners to Rod Sheva and Israel National Radio. I know that many of you tell us that you watch the programs and enjoy them. And there is a void, you know, and there's a lot of people all around the world are very interested in what's happening in Israel and very interested in what's happening in Jerusalem. And this is what, you know, this is like yourself. This is one of the reasons we're here, is to be able to be a voice, to be able to show people what's happening, bring news, bring interviews. And it's so exciting, you know, that we're here for such a time as this, that we can do this. You know, that it wasn't long ago that you couldn't, you know, that it was be impossible to be in Israel, you know, and with the Turkish authorities or even doing the mandate, it wasn't so easy to do broadcasting. And now we're here and able to bring programs. And I'll move straight on to your role now. Sure. You're involved in I Vote for Israel, which is I'll try and explain a little bit to the viewers. One of the interesting things is we've got the Anglo community here. The English-speaking community, very often American-based, and they are over here, but they have the potential to vote in the United States. So in other words, it's like people from the UK being in Spain and then being able to vote in the elections in the United Kingdom. So tell us a bit about how you got involved in because you've been involved in producing the show, and then you got now you're involved in the political realm.
Correct. Well, I had been involved in politics when I was in the States. I always found political campaigns to be fascinating, just the ability to impact elected leaders. And I'll say that it came from when I was 18, 19 years old. I was studying in a yeshiva, a Jewish seminary in Israel, and this was 1990. And it was during about to be the first Gulf War. And I remember I came in August of 90, and the war was scheduled for January of 91. The UN decided the war was going to be on a certain date in mid-January of 91. And I remember I'm in my own world, the first time in my life. I'm not really focusing on politics. I grew up in suburban Washington, D.C. A lot of my parents' friends and a lot of people in my synagogue were active, were involved in the government. So discussion of politics was not foreign to me by any stretch. But from August until December, January, I was really focused on my studies and trying to develop, and that was what I was there for. But when the discussion of the war came up, and eventually when the war was determined, that the UN determined that war was going to begin in January, a lot of my friends' parents made their children come home. And they would fly back from Israel. They would travel back to the States or back to Europe
Was that
It's very common.
was that when Saddam Hussein
Yeah.
throughened to,
That
and
was
they had the rooms where you had to seal them?
exactly.
And
So I was in a sealed room, and we learned how to seal my room. Ironically, my parents, they were coming to visit me, and they had scheduled a vacation for mid-January, exactly the week when the war was scheduled to begin. And I remember calling my dad, and I said, "Abba, are you still planning on coming? You know, there's supposed to be bad weather. They're forecasting a war next week. Are you still going to be coming?" And my father says, "Saddam Hussein doesn't tell me when I have my vacation or when I can visit my son." And that was my father's response, and I appreciated him coming, and we learned how to put on gas masks together. At that point, his parents were living in Jerusalem, so he went to be with them during the first few attacks, and we survived. And it made me, I think, a stronger person. How it relates to my political orientation was I noticed that of all of my friends who traveled back, fled Israel, none of my friends from the Washington, D.C. area did, because every single one of those friends, whether it was in my school or was in dozens of schools throughout the country, they all knew somebody who said, "Jerusalem's going to be fine. Your kids are going to be fine. Nothing really to worry about." Now, part of it was that my parents were actually here for the first few days, and that made things easier. But there was something else, that there was a certain confidence that those who had access, those who were involved, and they weren't full-time necessarily involved in politics, but many of my friends in D.C. who were used to talking to people who were involved in politics had a basic understanding. And I realized at that point that the ability to become politically active has real-time consequences and can affect our lives. It's not just something that you study in university or in school and you do a couple protests, but it actually has some consequence. And I just decided at that point that I wanted to be involved. And because I did know people, I wanted to try to leverage those contacts and to start working. And I immediately started working as a lobbyist, got involved in political campaigns, loved the idea of campaigning, and was always distressed when I saw people who didn't take the right to vote seriously and didn't care about it. They didn't vote very frequently.
Did you see that from an Israel point of view, that the importance of the American vote, or did you see it just as a general?
So in my 20s and 30s, it was more of a general thing, and my focus on U.S. politics was more fiscally within the U.S., on taxes, on spending, on privatization, pardon me, things of that nature. But invariably, as I would talk to elected officials about whatever the relevant issue I was talking about, as soon as we would put that aside, whether we agreed or disagree, the question, "Elie, what's going on in Israel?" And this was generally in the early 90s, mid-90s, in the Intifada. Why are they blowing each other up? What's going on? Well, what's the solution? There was a general, and this wasn't a matter, these are elected officials for the most part, who have the ability to really make a difference. And they're generally asking questions. They wanted, "Can you please explain to me what's going on?" And another thing that I realized was that because I was not coming to them as an expert on Israel, as someone who was with Israel orientation, but I had established a relationship with them based on U.S. domestic politics, there was a certain level of comfort, there was a certain rapport that we had generated, that then they felt much more comfortable with talking to me and hopefully taking my guidance or my comments at face value when it came to Israel. And that was something that I took with me for a while. And when I decided to make Aliyah, I realized I wanted to go back to doing that line of work, and I had been working in real estate for quite some time. And I decided I didn't want to do real estate here. I wanted to go back and having an impact, and this seemed like a natural bridge for me. Made a lot of sense. I did some digging, and I found out there had been attempts in the past, had never been successful. But with the presidential election coming up, there was indeed a desire, and I had gotten my legs under me in Israel a couple of years here that I was able to navigate the country. And I put together an excellent staff of Americans who really were going out and trying to encourage people to vote.
Now, the interesting thing is that the very thing that's so fantastic, that the Aliyah and settling into Israel could work against, because people are saying, well, you know, we've made Aliyah, we're now living in Israel, we're not bothered what's happening back in the States. Leave that to the voters in the United States. We're interested in the Knesset, into the local election in Jerusalem with Barkat. We're interested in our community, Jewish community, with the mayor, and now the very thing that the important thing of them settling into Israel, does that sometimes work against them being involved?
That certainly is an argument, but I would say when it's teased out, that argument actually works in our favor. One of the things that we've seen is that when Americans, and frankly anybody's making Aliyah, any Jews who are making Aliyah coming from their country, they want to become politically active, even though for the most part they're fleeing their country or really returning home to Israel is not a political statement negative toward their original country. It is definitely positive towards Israel. So certainly there's a combination of religious spirituality, coming home, but there is a political angle as well. So people are very politically aware when they come to Israel. So keeping that in a box that is limited to your immediate community in Israel is almost unnatural. It's much more natural to allow you to express yourself politically everywhere. One of the challenges that voters who no longer live in their home country, who still are citizens there and still have an obligation, in some cases it's an obligation to vote. In America it's not an obligation, it's a right, and it's a privilege to vote. But one of the challenges has been that it's the process, people don't know how to do it, it becomes difficult.
We've just run out of time. I'm so sorry. It's one of the things we're limited by time. It's been great to have you with us. We hope with that we can get you on next week. Thank you so much for joining us today on In the Last Days television program. Don't forget to visit the website and send us an email to info@inthelastdays.com. And remember, we're living in the last days.
You've been watching In the Last Days, a TV program with Martin and Natalie Blackham, the program that looks at Israel and the end times with teaching from a Hebraic perspective. If you would like to financially support the program or find out about conferences, meetings or ministry products, then please contact us with the details on your screen. Visit our easy-to-use website at www.inthelastdays.com and register for our free e-newsletter. Get the latest news from Israel, product information, online video teaching, or watch today's TV program at a time that's convenient to you. Thank you again, friends and partners, for making this program possible.
See you same time, same station for the next program from In the Last Days.